Badger chose the culvert bank because it was the safest kind of place to do risky work, hidden, dry, and close to everything that mattered. The culvert sat under County Road 14, where the pavement dipped slightly between two hayfields and a patch of second-growth woods. Most drivers never noticed it. They rolled over that spot at 50 miles an hour with coffee cups in hand, thinking about appointments and weather. But down below, under the roadbed, water moved through a corrugated pipe and carved a shallow channel into the clay. In late summer, the creek was thin, just a trickle sliding over stones. After a rain, it ran louder and brown, carrying leaves and silt like it had something to prove. Either way, the culvert bank stayed useful. On one side of the pipe, the ground rose in a clean slope of packed dirt where grass struggled to grow. On the other side, the bank was undercut and shaded, roots exposed, a small hollow hidden by nettles and tall weeds. That hollow stayed cooler than the open field. It stayed drier than the low ditch. It stayed invisible from the road. A perfect place for an animal that liked privacy, and a perfect place to reach the turnip field without crossing open ground. Mara Ellison noticed the missing turnips, the way you noticed a problem when it became personal, by the weight of a crate. She ran a small farm stand with her dad on the edge of town. They didn't have huge acreage. They had a few careful rows of vegetables, a couple of hoop houses, and a loyal group of customers who liked buying from someone whose hands were always dirty and whose prices made sense. Turnips weren't their biggest moneymaker, but they were steady. People bought them for soups and roasting, and because they were the kind of vegetable you felt virtuous putting in your bag. This year, the turnips had looked perfect, round shoulders bulging above the soil, greens tall and healthy, no obvious pest damage on the leaves. Mara had been proud of them in that quiet way farmers got proud, because root crops were a promise you couldn't check until harvest. Then harvest came. Mara walked the row with a knife and a stack of crates, pulling turnips with a practiced twist. The first few popped out with satisfying resistance, dirt clinging to their skins. But when she filled the first crate and lifted it, the crate felt wrong. Light. She frowned and set it down. Maybe her hands were tired. Maybe she was imagining it. She lifted again, testing. Still light. Mara glanced at the turnips she'd pulled. They were there, but some were smaller than they should have been, like they'd never fully grown, or like something had been nibbling them underground. She walked farther down the row and pulled another. This one came up with a ragged bite taken out of the side. Not a clean slice like a shovel would do. A gnawed hollow, teeth marks visible in the pale flesh. Mara's stomach tightened. She pulled another and found the same thing, damaged, hollowed, or oddly small. The tops looked great, but the roots were going missing. Her dad, Ron, was at the wash station rinsing carrots. When Mara approached with a half-ruined turnip in her hand, he looked up and read her face immediately. "What?" he asked. Mara held it out. "Something's eating them," she said. Ron took the turnip and turned it in his hands. He frowned at the tooth marks. "Rabbits don't do this," he muttered. "Deer don't dig." Mara pointed toward the far end of the turnip plot, where the rows ran closest to the drainage ditch that led to the culvert under the road. "It's worse down there," she said. Ron sighed and wiped his hands on his jeans. "Let's look," he said. They walked the rows together, Mara pointing out the pattern. The damage was scattered but heavier near the ditch side. The plants weren't destroyed above ground. The leaves weren't shredded. It wasn't a daytime grazer. It was something that worked below the surface or at night, something that could dig or burrow. Ron crouched at the edge of the turnip row nearest the ditch and pushed aside weeds. He scraped lightly at the soil with his fingers. There, half hidden, was a small opening, roundish, about the width of a fist, leading into a shallow tunnel beneath the row. Mara's skin prickled. A burrow? She asked. Ron nodded slowly. Could be, he said. Groundhog, maybe. Mara stared at the hole and imagined an entire network under her turnips. Would a groundhog do that much? She asked. Ron stood and looked toward the culvert. Depends what else is around, he said. But groundhogs usually like open edges. This is tucked. They followed the ditch line toward the road, stepping carefully around wet patches and tall grasses. The ditch narrowed and deepened, funneling toward the culvert. The air felt cooler there, shaded by trees on the roadside. When they reached the culvert, Mara smelled damp clay and leaf rot. Water trickled through the pipe, making a quiet hollow sound. On the shaded bank, the weeds were flattened in a distinct path, like something heavy and low to the ground used it regularly. Ron pointed. Look at that, he said. Mara leaned closer. The flattened path led into the undercut bank, where roots formed a natural ceiling over a dark hollow. The entrance was wider than the small burrow hole back by the turnips. This opening looked like something could crawl in and out comfortably. Ron crouched and sniffed the air, then grimaced. Musky, he said. Mara's eyes widened. Badger, she guessed, because she'd seen badger videos online, because she knew they dug, because her brain grabbed the first animal that fit. Ron didn't answer immediately. He studied the ground. Then he pointed at a set of tracks in the damp clay beside the water, wide prints with distinct toes and claw marks. Mara's mouth went dry. Is that? She started. Ron nodded once. Badger, he said, voice low. Mara stared at the tracks, feeling a mix of fascination and irritation. Badgers were rare enough here that seeing one should have felt special. Instead, it felt like discovering a thief had chosen your farm as its pantry. So it's coming from the culvert, she said. Ron's gaze followed the flattened path. It's living near here or using this as cover, he replied. Culvert gives it a safe corridor, and our turnips are right there. Mara looked back toward the turnip field. The ditch line was like a hidden highway, shade, cover, and direct access to the rows. A badger could slip out at night, dig quickly, and pull turnips without ever crossing the open field where owls or coyotes might notice. Badger chose the culvert bank because it was smart, and because the farm had made the buffet easy. Mara exhaled hard. What do we do? She asked. Ron's face tightened the way it did when a problem had no clean fix. We don't poison, he said immediately, as if he'd read the thought before she had it. We don't trap unless we have to. Badgers are part of the land. Mara rubbed her forehead. But we're losing crop, she said. Ron nodded. Then we make it harder, he replied. He pointed to the ditch line. We break the easy route. Mara followed his finger and saw the simple truth. The badger was using the shaded bank and ditch weeds like cover. If the ditch edge was cleaned and opened, if the culvert bank was less inviting, if the turnip row edge was reinforced, the badger might move on to easier hunting, mice, grubs, things that didn't require digging into a farm plot. Clear the weeds, Mara said slowly, thinking. Ron nodded. Clear the weeds, he agreed. And we can install a buried mesh barrier along this edge. Not deep, just enough to stop easy digging from the ditch side. Mara looked at the culvert opening again. The dark hollow under roots felt like a hidden doorway into her field. How do we know it's the badger and not something else? She asked, though she already knew. Ron tapped the track. Claws, he said simply. And the way the dirt is thrown. Badgers dig like they mean it. Mara glanced at her ruined turnip again. She imagined those claws working under the row at night, fast and efficient, pulling out roots, taking the best parts, leaving the rest hollowed and light. The turnips went light because the badger didn't need to eat the whole thing. It needed calories, moisture, easy reward. It took what it wanted and left the rest. Ron stood and dusted his hands. "We'll start today," he said. "Cut back the ditch, make the edge open, and tonight we set a camera." Mara nodded. A camera trap would at least show them what they were dealing with. Confirm the badger's schedule, see if there were more than one, maybe even catch other visitors that came for leftovers. As they walked back toward the field, Mara glanced once more at the Culvert bank. She couldn't see the badger, of course. It was underground or deep in weeds, resting in its cool hollow, safe from the sun and from eyes. But she could feel its presence in the tracks and the flattened grass, in the way the ditch line felt like a secret route. The culvert was just a pipe under a road to humans. To a badger, it was a protected tunnel system with exits exactly where food grew. And now that it had found the farm, Mara understood the real problem wasn't one missing harvest. It was that the badger had learned a shortcut. And shortcuts were habits that didn't break easily. The camera caught the badger at 2:17 a.m., and when Mara saw the footage the next morning, she stopped chewing her toast halfway through. It wasn't because the badger looked scary. It didn't. It looked like a compact little tank with a striped face, moving with stubborn purpose and zero hesitation. What stunned Mara was how efficiently it used their farm, like it had been designed for it. The video showed the ditch line first, weeds swaying, then a low shape sliding out of the culvert bank hollow. The badger paused only long enough to sniff, then trotted along the ditch like it was following a painted lane. It never once stepped into open grass. It hugged cover, climbed the bank, and disappeared into the turnip rows with the confidence of something that had done it many nights before. Then the digging started. Badgers didn't scratch around like uncertain animals. They excavated. The soil flew backward in fast bursts, and within seconds the badger's shoulders and head were down, forelegs working like shovels. The camera angle didn't show the exact moment it reached a turnip, but it showed the result. The badger backed out, muzzle dusty, then shifted a turnip with its paws, as if turning it to find the best side. It gnawed quickly, took a section, and moved on. It didn't eat the whole thing. It didn't carry it away. It sampled, stripped, and kept the night moving. By 2:31 a.m., it had hit 3 different spots along the ditch side row, leaving small craters and half-hollowed turnips like a trail of receipts. Mara watched the clip twice, then sat back and said, "It's not even messy." Ron, her dad, leaned on the counter with his coffee and nodded slowly. "That's what I told you," he said. "Badgers dig like they mean it." Mara rubbed her forehead. "So we cut the weeds today," she said. Ron nodded again. "We cut the weeds," he agreed, "and we start the barrier." They didn't have time to do a perfect, expensive installation. They had time to do a farm fix, practical, fast, and good enough to change the animals' cost-benefit math. They spent the morning with brush cutters and rakes, clearing the ditch bank down to stubble along the stretch closest to the turnips. Mara hated it because it made the edge look raw and ugly, and because she knew weeds weren't just mess, they were habitat. But she also knew the weeds had been a curtain. Curtains made animals bold. By noon, the ditch line looked open. The culvert bank hollow still existed under roots, but the approach to it was exposed. If the badger wanted to use that route now, it would have to cross visible ground, and visibility meant risk. After lunch, Ron brought out a roll of heavy-gauge hardware cloth, wire mesh with small squares, and a shovel. They planned to bury it like an underground fence along the ditch-side edge of the turnip plot. Not deep enough to stop every determined dig, but deep enough to prevent easy straight-down tunneling from the ditch bank. Mara helped dig the trench, hating the way the clay fought the shovel. Sweat ran down her back even though the day was cooler. The trench ran parallel to the ditch, about a foot inside the turnip row. They worked in sections, sliding mesh into place and backfilling dirt, stamping it down with boots. It felt like building a border for an animal that didn't respect borders. Around mid-afternoon, Sherry Dalton's truck pulled into the farm lane and rolled to a stop near the wash station. Sherry climbed out holding a bundle of fence posts in one hand and a bag of apples in the other. "You look like you're digging a moat," she called. Mara wiped her forehead with her sleeve. "It's a badger," she said without preamble. Sherry's eyebrows rose. "No kidding," she replied. "We got one too. My beets looked like someone tested them with a spoon." Ron walked over and accepted the bag of apples with a nod. "Ours is using the culvert," he said. "Smart route. Hard to block without making the whole ditch a construction site." Sherry stepped closer and looked at the trench and mesh. "You doing hardware cloth?" she asked. Ron nodded. "Along the ditch edge," he said, "and we cleared weeds." Sherry made a thoughtful sound. "We cleared ours last year for gophers," she said. Badger didn't care. It still came, but it did change where it dug, moved farther down where cover stayed. Mara's stomach tightened. "So it just adapts," she said. Sherry shrugged. "Everything adapts," she replied. "Question is whether it adapts away from your best rows." They kept working. Mara tried to let Sherry's comment be information instead of discouragement. They weren't aiming for perfect prevention. They were aiming for nudging. That evening, they reset the trail camera, angling it lower and closer to the ditch side row where the badger had been most active. Ron also set up a second camera near the culvert bank hollow itself, hoping to capture the badger's entry and exit points. Mara didn't love the idea of watching her farm get raided in HD, but she needed facts. After dinner, she walked the turnip row edge one more time, checking the backfilled trench. The dirt looked smooth now, as if nothing had been done. Only the slight line of disturbed soil suggested a hidden barrier below. The ditch bank, cleared of weeds, looked strange, too open, too honest. She could see the culvert mouth clearly now, the dark, corrugated tunnel under the road. It seemed ridiculous that a piece of drainage infrastructure could serve as a wildlife highway, but the more Mara looked, the more she understood. Humans had created clean corridors, and animals simply used them. Night fell. The farm quieted. Ron went to bed early. Mara stayed up later than usual, not because she expected to see the badger in person, but because she found herself listening to the night like it was a system she'd forgotten to learn. At 1:40 a.m., she finally slept. At 6:12 a.m., she woke and reached for her phone before her eyes were fully open. She checked the camera app, because the cameras uploaded low-res clips to a station near the barn. Sometimes the signal was bad, but often it worked. There were notifications. Mara sat up, heart beating faster than it had any right to for a small animal. She opened the first clip. 2:05 a.m., the culvert camera. The badger appeared again, emerging from the hollow under roots. It paused longer this time. It sniffed the clear ditch line and hesitated as if noticing the change. The open bank had removed its comfortable invisibility. Mara leaned closer to the screen. The badger stepped forward anyway, trotting along the ditch. But it moved faster, more alert, head lifting slightly as if checking the open space. Then the second clip loaded. The turnip edge camera. The badger approached the row at its usual spot and began to dig. For 10 seconds it worked hard, dirt spraying. Then, nothing. The digging slowed. The badger's head lifted. It pawed again, then again, but now the motion looked irritated, like it had hit something that didn't give. It had. The mesh. Mara's breath caught. The badger dug at the same point for another minute, shifting angles, trying to get leverage. It scratched, it shoved, it pushed its nose into the hole and tried to widen it. The mesh held. It didn't stop the badger from digging. It stopped the dig from becoming access. Finally, the badger backed out and shook dirt off its face. It moved 10 feet down the row and tried again. Same result. It tried a third spot farther down where Mara and Ron had finished later and had maybe not buried as deep. This time the badger dug longer. It found the edge of the mesh and worked at it, clawing, testing. It nearly got under. Mara could see it push its shoulder in and strain. Then it stopped and sat back on its haunches for a second, looking almost offended. Mara let out a laugh she didn't mean to laugh. "Yeah," she whispered, "it's not free anymore." The badger moved on. It didn't leave the area immediately, though. It followed the ditch line farther down, toward the wash and the road bend where the turnip row ended and the pasture started. It sniffed, dug briefly at a spot where the mesh didn't extend, then trotted away into the woods. Mara stared at the screen, surprised at the relief blooming in her chest. The barrier had worked, mostly. It had forced a change. But the clip also showed the next problem arriving. As the badger trotted along the ditch, it paused at a low mound near the culvert bank, one Mara hadn't noticed before because weeds had hidden it. The badger put its head down and did something quick and deliberate. A little scrape, a little press, then a brief posture shift. Scent marking. Claiming. Mara remembered Ron's words. Musky. She understood now that it wasn't just using the culvert as a route. It was establishing a territory line and a food station. The more it worked the area, the more it invested in it. Badger chose the culvert bank because it was safe and smart. Yes, but also because it could turn that spot into a base. Mara carried her phone to the kitchen, where Ron was already making coffee. She didn't bother with small talk. She held the screen out. "It hit the mesh," she said. Ron watched, silent, jaw set. When the badger backed off, Ron nodded once, satisfied. When the badger moved down the line and marked near the culvert, Ron's expression tightened. "It's not leaving," Ron said quietly. "It left the row," Mara replied. "For now." Ron took a slow sip of coffee. "For now is all we ever get," he said. Then he pointed at the screen. "We need to extend the mesh another 30 feet down, and we need to deal with that bank hollow." Mara frowned. "How?" she asked. "We can't collapse it. It's under roots." Ron's eyes narrowed the way they did when he was thinking through a stubborn job. "We don't collapse," he said. "We discourage." They spent the morning extending the mesh barrier and reinforcing the shallow end where the badger had nearly found a weak edge. Mara dug and tamped and stapled the mesh to short wooden stakes driven into the trench line so it wouldn't curl upward with repeated pressure. Then they went to the culvert bank. Ron didn't want to destroy habitat. He also didn't want a badger headquarters 10 yards from the turnip plot. There was a line between coexisting and inviting. They cleared more of the bank approach and removed the loose debris that made the hollow cozy. Old leaves, sticks, and a drift of dry grass tucked under roots like bedding. Ron didn't reach inside. He didn't poke. He simply made the space less comfortable by taking away the soft stuff and increasing exposure. Mara sprinkled coarse gravel at the hollow entrance, not to hurt the animal, but to make the footing less pleasant for lounging. They also placed a few larger rocks at the approach angle that had been easiest, forcing any animal to climb awkwardly rather than slide in smoothly. It felt small, almost petty. But systems changed with small frictions. That night, Mara checked the cameras again like a habit now. The badger returned at 2:22 a.m. It followed the ditch as before, but it moved differently, quicker, more scanning, less confident. It tried one digging point and hit mesh. It tried another and hit mesh. It went to the hollow, sniffed, paused, then moved on, not settling. Mara watched it on the clip and felt something that surprised her. Respect. The badger wasn't malicious. It was persistent, adaptable, and willing to work. It had been winning because the farm edge had been easy. Now it was less easy, and it was doing the math again. Over the next week, the turnip damage slowed. Not to zero, never to zero, but enough that Mara's crates felt heavy again, honest weight in her hands. The lightness that had started the whole problem began to fade, replaced by the satisfying resistance of intact roots. And the badger? It didn't vanish. It still used the culvert bank occasionally. Cameras caught it passing through, sniffing, marking, then heading toward the woods on the far side where mice and grubs lived in easier abundance. Mara learned the real lesson the hard way. You don't win against wildlife by erasing it. You win by removing the easy reward and letting the animal choose a better option somewhere else. One evening, as she closed the farm stand, Mara stood at the edge of the turnip rows and looked toward the culvert under County Road 14. The ditch line was cleaner now, more open. The hidden highway had become a visible boundary. A car passed overhead, tires humming, unaware of the small dramas happening below. Mara thought about how close everything was. Road, farm, culvert, animal route. People built one thing for water, and an animal turned it into a corridor. People planted food, and an animal learned the shortest line to it. Then the people had to learn the animal's logic to protect their own. The culvert bank would always be a tempting hideout. The badger would always be a digger, and the turnips, if Mara kept paying attention, would stay heavy enough to sell, roast, and feel proud of. Not because the badger was gone, because the farm had finally stopped making it so easy to stay.